Okay, and we are back for part 11, I think this is, of Star Trek Resurgence. It's been a long session, but man, I mean, this is going to be the review. So as we go into it, usually at the end of the game, when we're watching the credits, I like to go over the adventure so far. This time, because we had hit almost exactly an hour, we've decided to split it off into this sort of separate episode. And on that note, anyone that comes into this one, understand that we will be talking in detail about the game and spoiling every specific plot point along the way. So this is your big, bright spoiler spotlight, spoiler lighthouse spinning around saying, hey, major spoilers for Star Trek Resurgence, a game which I will just say, yeah, I definitely recommend. This was a great time. I want to say from start to finish. There were some bumps along the road that we're going to talk about, but let's dive right into it here. I should also point out this is being recorded live, so forgive me if I stumble over my words or fail to finish my thoughts properly, but I wanted to talk about the game here hot on the heels of having finished it. Just a couple things that I don't think landed quite as hot as it could have been. Like, this is a remarkable achievement, I think, but there are some things that render it not being 100%, not as good as it could have been, and let's talk about that now. The first thing that comes to mind is the audio mix in the game, which is just very strange, and I tried to avoid talking about it too much during the playthrough, but even in that first episode, it was difficult to keep my mind off the fact that this is the quietest game that I think that we've played. To draw back the curtain a little bit, usually when we stream games, the streaming software has the audio track for the game notched down by about 4 to 6 decibels depending on the specific game. This is the only game that we've played where we had it actually all the way up. In the streaming software, we had Star Trek Resurgence running as high as we could, and even then we had to take some steps to notch down the music and sound effects to make sure the dialogue would always be heard. And then it would sometimes switch scenes and suddenly you'd have a character that was talking much more loudly than anyone in the previous scene, even though in context they're only supposed to be talking at their normal speaking volume. The volume mix was all over the place, and that's disappointing because I think the quality of the sound effects are really good, and the music that was composed for this is some of the best Star Trek music that I've heard in a while. But in order to make sure that the rest of the story was going to be discernible, we wound up cutting the volume on the music down by about 50%, I think, at the end. As a result, I don't think that I can say very much about the quality of the music, simply because it wound up being rather submerged compared to where I think it was intended to be. And if I was to make a vote for an early patch that I'd like to see come out, I would love to see whatever sound engineering team they have available at Dramatic Labs take another pass using their source material to make sure that the dialogue is brought up a little bit and the music on the whole can be more evenly balanced so that it does as much for the scenes as I think that it would be capable of. Same thing goes for the sound effects. I think that they absolutely nailed the audio quality of the ships and the phasers, and sometimes just the simple, subtle things like walking down a padded hallway or the echo of the voices in a large room are very, very well done. Other times you'll have scenes where sound effects appear to just straight up be missing. These are things that can be fixed in post, and I do hope that we'll get some patches that fix some of that stuff up. There were also some points where there were some unfinished character models. There at the very end, when they were at the funeral scene, like if you look into the crowd, this came up again during the mutiny scene, which by the way was literally named Mutiny aboard the Resolute, which kind of gave away the game as to what was going to happen there and how everything was going to go. There's just a handful of character models that look like they were crude placeholders, and the development team said, oh, we'll get back to these later on, and then they just didn't. There was one security guard that shows up a few different times on Miranda's team who sort of had this silvery hair, and I could never quite decide if that was some sort of an odd lighting thing or if this person is part something that's not human or just really likes to dye his hair like chrome. There's a few characters in the game that feel unfinished, and there's a few others in the game that feel like somebody hit random on the character generator at the beginning of their session and just went with the fifth thing that came up because they thought it was kind of funny. That brings us to, like, just generally speaking from a technical perspective, I think Star Trek Resurgence is fascinating. I would be so interested to read an after action, a post-mortem on this game and how it came together, because as I mentioned in part 1, this game has no graphic settings. I don't think there's ever been a game that we have streamed on the channel that has fewer graphic settings, and that includes things like small indie games where you open them up and there's at least an overall, like, quality low, medium, high. This game, as far as we can tell, doesn't even have that. You have an option for resolution and VSync. Resolution maxes out at 1080p. We also discovered at the end here that the game runs at a locked 30. It appears that maybe you can go into the console settings and override that, but I assume that it's locked at 30 for a reason, so I would not have changed that even if I had known about it. I want to play games usually as they are intended, and this game could not be more clear about how it's intended to play. There's no settings for lighting, for textures, for draw distance, for post-processing effects. What you see is what was intended by the developers, and they have removed every surface level ability to change that. Now, the good news is the games seem to run extremely well for us. Well, extremely is going a bit far. There were some odd hitches that would happen, particularly during scene changes. There are these what seemed to be like individual frames that would occur on scene changes where suddenly the characters would, like, very rapidly drop into place or turn to face the correct direction. I noticed this throughout the playthrough. I didn't want to draw a lot of attention to it because it was distracting enough for people that were looking at the screen. But yeah, from a technical perspective, this game feels a little bit like a hot mess, but with emphasis on the hot, because when the game is working as intended, it simply looks phenomenal. Let's, again, talk about the places where it's not quite up to snuff, because then I really want to gush about how it looks where it counts. Things like the combat sequences were serviceable. You know, you see the ships and they shoot the phasers, or even a character like shoots a phaser at somebody, and it always looks like the beam is generating a little bit ahead of the model of the phaser rather than coming out of the actual barrel. The effects in the photon torpedoes I found particularly lackluster. I really would have preferred something that was a little bit more well-defined. In my head, I think of it like a Star Trek II, a Wrath of Khan style torpedo, where it may not be traveling all that quickly, but man, does it look like it hits with an impact. There were some satisfying scenes, including just a particularly memorable one where Jar Rydak issued the fire order against one of the Elydian vessels and just blew it stem to stern. And in a different game with a better engine or a lot more time from the developers, they could have worked that up and made it look even better. But nonetheless, the tone of the scene really worked for me very well. I think that in every way that the graphics sometimes don't work as well as they could, particularly combat sequences and the ship battles and stuff, they work best where they need to. This game is a narrative game. It's from a bunch of former Telltale developers, and you can tell because of all the dialogue that there is, and the character models and the lighting on those character models and the interior design. Anytime the characters are inside and they're talking to one another, it looks amazing. There are a few occasions that I picked up on where there's some unfortunate animation popping, sudden shifts from one pose into another, but these felt very far and few between compared to some of the other narrative games that we've played. When the characters are speaking to one another, they look... It's hard for me to overstate how well the lighting engine and the character models work on Jar Rydak. It particularly struck me on Jar Rydak, Captain Solano, Ed Solar, and also the Elydian admiral whose name I just never quite picked up. The guy who had the other soldier who was like a daughter to him. Galvin and Sidrun, especially Sidrun, looked amazing. There were so many scenes where they would be talking to each other, negotiating with each other, sort of like doing this verbal sparring during the diplomatic scenes, or threatening each other at the end, where even through the view screen, they just looked absolutely like they were a part of the world that they were in. And when you're playing a narrative game where it's so important to connect with the characters, that is so valuable. And I think that for every time that the game engine seemed like it was creaking a little bit, here's another example. There's this odd dithering effect that I would notice frequently throughout the playthrough, especially on characters' hair. Now, there's points in the playthrough where that felt stylistic, especially when they were looking through a force field, and you would see these sort of like speckles that were fading in and out as part of the force field. And on the other side of it, events like movement would leave these trails or these traces that would sort of streak across. And this seemed like a stylistic choice. And if that's where it began and ended, I think I'd probably say, wow, that was a really cool effect to help underscore that this is an energy field. Or like when the holograms are up and there's movement on the holograms during some of the briefing, you would see this like dot of light that would move across, and then as it would intersect with another or move across another hologram, it would leave this streaking trail. That looks great. But then there's other parts where it's clearly not intentional, where Jara Rydek will be walking up to the captain's chair and you can see this odd sort of shimmer or shake going across her hair where it's like the strands aren't quite able to resolve. And I don't know if that was done entirely for stylistic reasons, for performance reasons, or if it's just a limitation of the engine and the way that they built it. But set aside these here and there, oh, that doesn't necessarily look really good, or that animation's a little bit clunky. When it comes to the characters talking to each other and emoting at each other, this stands shoulder to shoulder with any other Telltale game that I've ever played, and I think ties for the best looking narrative game that we've played on the channel. I'm really between this and one other that I don't necessarily want to spoil here, but suffice to say, I was extremely pleased with how good this looks. I also, again, need to circle back to just the interior design. There's something about the way that they built the turbo lift and the corridors in the ship and the engineering bay and the bridge, particularly when it would go to red alert. It just looks perfect. And I feel like the set designers, the level designers, environment designers that worked on this game, they must have been tasked to really present the most authentic Star Trek experience that you could possibly have, because those interiors were going to be so important and stand in such stark contrast to the mines that you visit and the Hakan royal negotiating chamber that you go into there with the Queen. They really, really nailed it on the interior design. And the way that I think about it is, if I was to watch a really great episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, and then the special effects in it are kind of cheesy by the standards of 2023, that's not really going to impact my enjoyment of a well-written and well-acted episode. And that's what this series had. It felt like watching an extended, brand new Star Trek movie, except of course with the interactivity of being engaged in the story and making decisions that felt impactful. And they nailed the feeling of Star Trek in a way that is difficult for me to quantify. At first I was in the mindset of, what do I think a brand new first officer would need to do in order to establish herself well, basically with her first day on the job. But as things got more real, I found myself thinking about, what would a character in Star Trek do? What would I feel satisfied as a fan of the Star Trek franchise to see the characters doing? And the way that they were able to have so many opportunities in the dialogue to resolve conflicts with calls to principles, ideals, these themes of unity and cooperation and striving for peace. One of the things that really stuck out for me was when we were negotiating with the Elydians and the Hakan early on. And one of them is like, oh, you're just here because you want the dilithium. Your interest here, you talk about peace, but all you want is the dilithium. And I'm trying to remember if I said aloud as part of the playthrough, no, you need to go talk to my boss. You need to go find with somebody with a lot more pips on their collar, or maybe a lot fewer, because that's not my role. I'm not here with Starfleet procurement. I'm on board the Resolute. We have enough dilithium to get us home, and that's about as much as I care about. So if you want to have a conversation about economies of scale, that's some other room. The one that we're in is, I don't want this fight to turn into bloodshed, and it feels like there's a real mystery. There's what has all the hallmarks of a, not quite a civil war, but a labor uprising against management. And this feels like something that would make for a good Star Trek story, but also there's this air of mystery. How did this less technologically advanced race manage to shake off and push back a more technologically advanced species? And why did they do it? Because they've been getting along so well, as far as we know, up until now. Everything was fine until it was loud and violent, and that feels like something that we want to look into. I was fully prepared to get there and to have the Hotari say, we've been brutalized, we've been kept under their boot, but even when we were there, that didn't feel like it was part of it. It just felt like the Hotari were saying, well, we're tired of this arrangement and we're pushing back, which would be their right, because it is their moon that has all the dilithium, and the Illydians sort of came along and provided the warp drives and the mining technology to begin getting it, and then it kind of feels like the Illydians are just sitting back, letting the Hotari do all the work, giving them some technical support, and then taking probably lion's share of the profits for all of this. So yeah, what are the Hotari getting out of it at this point? It makes sense that they might want to end the arrangement, but not necessarily sense on why they would start at violence. And then you get into the whole mystery of it. How did this happen, and what's actually going on here? And that's when you get into the Takan storyline. So it felt at every level like something that could have been like a little mini arc on Star Trek The Next Generation, maybe a couple movies, and instead they decided to go with it and, you know, turn it into this game with an all new crew, and that went to their benefit because of how great the characters were. Just starting off the top of my head, I loved Captain Solano. He feels to me like a career military guy who is getting on in years, hasn't quite reached the tiers of his job that he would like, and the last time that he reached for the stars, he wound up limping home in a cracked open ship, and he lost a bunch of crew for it. Now he's, as he said to Jar Rydick at the beginning, he's looking for a big win. He feels like he's running out of opportunities to really make a splash and get that boost from captain up to admiral, and he's looking for her assistance to get everything back in line and have this, like, this mission might not be it, but get to this last big hurrah where he can get himself promoted, and then he's like, hey, a rising tide lift all boats. You help me out and I'll help you out. He's very self-interested to a destructive point, which I don't feel was overplayed. To Solano, it actually felt credible to me that this guy at this point might be falling deeper into denial and saying like, no, it can't have gone this wrong. Not with everything that happened at Star Dock when, like, the docking clamps broke, and now we get out here and now they stole the ship frequencies for all of Starfleet. It can't be that bad. I'm sure it's not. No, it definitely isn't. We just won't tell anybody, and then we won't have to face the consequences of that. So I was 100% into the idea of Solano not being one of the Takan, just because his self-servingness felt completely organic to the character. I feel like I've known people like Solano in life, so to have a captain that is so thoroughly compromised by his own avarice and his own desire, his own greed, his own envy, that I just really liked the way that his character played out. And it's one of the reasons that, again, I was earnestly surprised to discover that he had been turned into one of the Takan at the end. I kept waiting for that reveal. The same thing goes for Commander Westbrook. when Jara comes on board the Resolute, one of the first things that Ermot says is, hey, listen, you might want to tread lightly because there was a lot of interest among the crew in promoting from within. Yeah, Westbrook was super salty about not having gotten Jara Rydek's job, and got saltier when later in the story we wound up passing him over. Regardless of what Captain Solano said to him about not being a people person, he just doesn't have the demeanor to be in charge of the crew. He's probably an excellent science officer. I wouldn't know because his ideas were presented so poorly, so hurriedly, and with so little apparent consideration for the side effects that I found it difficult to side with him at any point. But for him to have exploded in a public corridor against the captain of the ship because he didn't get chosen only demonstrates the fact that Jara made the right choice by not going with him, which then of course brings us over to Bedrosian. The choice is, do we save all of the crystals of the Takan people, this extinct species? Everyone who is here in the crystals has done absolutely nothing wrong, and it feels like a central Starfleet principle to not condemn an entire species because of the actions of certain members of that species. And here's Bedrosian saying, nah, just nuke them from orbit, it's the only way to be sure. No thanks. I think that instead what we're going to do is beam them aboard, not resurrect them. And we don't know anything about this process that they're being used to bioform. If I was one of the Takan and I'd been asleep for several thousand millennia, and then I woke up in somebody's body and somebody said to me, it's this or death, I might very well choose this. And one of the Takan that we interacted with straight up said he's afraid of death, and he will go to great lengths to keep himself alive, including freezing himself inside of a crystal. Let's just imagine that we clone a compatible body and with no mind, just a blank slate, a tabula rasa, and then we inject a Takan in there and we say, hi, you're alive again, it's a pleasure to meet you, can we talk for a while because we don't want to be weird and violent about it? That Takan person would say, well, yeah, sounds good to me. Hey, do you have a planet that I could settle? I really like farming. It could be that simple, but here's Bedrosian saying, no, obliterate all of them. And then at the end, going, well, we do have that entire cargo bay full of the crystals that you wanted to save, so what's the harm if we just exterminate these others that are surrendering and pleading for our help? What did the Federation do when the Klingon moon exploded? They went on a diplomatic mission to talk to their historical enemies to see if they could broker a peace and help the Klingon Empire. And the next thing you get is Worf serving at the tactical station there on the Starship Enterprise. What did they do when there was a problem with Romulus? They used this opportunity to broker a peace, to say to the face of people who were 5 minutes ago your enemies, but now saying, we surrender, we're sorry, we're asking for your help, we're pleading for your help, and to say no and blow them up. It goes completely against the tone of Star Trek that they have done so much work in this game from a writing and design standpoint to underscore again and again. So Bedrosian's attitude I just found horribly ugly. I want to say again, I like the character. I really like having somebody there on the bridge crew who's there to say to you as a player, it's okay. It's okay, you don't have to stand up for these ideals. You can give in to vengeance. You can give in to that darkness and get your revenge against them. And to choose not to do that is what gives it meaning. You're not being railroaded down the line of living up to Gene Roddenberry's vision from the 1970s. It's here in the 2020s being able to say, I'm choosing to go with this, and I don't think that Bedrosian is a very good person. I was happy to have her standing at tactical because reportedly she's good at her job, but no, I wasn't going to listen to her advice on eliminating any of the Takan, and as far as I'm concerned, I accepted her resignation. This was an all-hands-on-deck battle, and I would have taken anybody walking in there. What's his name? Enabrin Tain? He could have taken tactical if he thought he could do a good job at it. Anything to rescue the maximum number of people and to make sure that we haven't accidentally lured the heart of the Starfleet war fleet into this hopeless battle. But once that's over, once the emergency has passed, Lieutenant Bedrosian, thank you very much for your service. I wish you the best of luck. You do not have a place on this crew. You don't have the temperament. You do, Captain, you do this or I quit. Even if I were to agree with her, I would invite her to tender her resignation for laying down that kind of ultimatum as a negotiating tactic. I just don't feel like that's professional demeanor. I don't feel like that's professional demeanor aboard a military craft. Those are my thoughts on Bedrosian. I love the character because of the role that she serves in the story, but was not sorry to see her absent aboard the Resolute when everything finished up. Edzilar was like the buddy to me. I was close to saying Edzilar is there as the Harley Quinn. She's there to give Diaz somebody to talk to. He can't really talk to Chovak, their boss, because he's a Vulcan and small talk is like kryptonite to them. So instead, she's just here so that Diaz and Edzilar can talk at each other about what the engineering is, and then one of them can say, like, putting too much air into a balloon, and that way the audience, the player, understands what the hell they're talking about. However, they really turned that around when Edzilar had the story that she shared aboard the Elydian ship that had been taken over. She has this moment where she's talking about her sister, and Edzilar is a Trill. She talks about how her sister had always wanted to join with a symbiote, was chosen into the program, got a symbiote, and was just never the same. And it's not, to my memory, said directly, but it feels to me like what happened to Edzilar's sister is she just outgrew Edzilar. She was too much more now. And whatever it was that they had shared in their room, whatever experiences they had had growing up, was now simply one lifetime of many. All of this interpersonal connection that Edzilar had had with her own sister was now just one of many in a cacophony of lifetimes and other interpersonal connections, and it was too small. It was too parochial for Edzilar's sister. And then when Edzilar says, I'll say this, when Edzilar says that her sister completely cut her out, I don't know that I believe that. I'm not sure that Edzilar's sister did cut her out, because maintaining the current relationships of the host feels like it's central to the Trill. What I feel like happened is that the distance that they felt became so much that Neely Edzilar herself just felt cut out, and it was too painful, the closeness that had been lost, that she elected to leave and now tells herself, well, I was cut out. It's true that I'm reading a little bit into it just based on other experiences that we've seen with the Trill, but there's a real pain there that spoke to me, and it was a very, very humanizing moment for Edzilar that elevated her from Diaz's buddy, who is there for the purposes of explaining the plot, to a much more fully fledged character. And I was glad that she survived, which maybe then brings us to Diaz, who doesn't. I'm surprised and actually really pleased that at the end of this story, there is no mechanism to reverse the bioforming. They don't get the reset button that the crew on Voyager was handed just before the credits of every single episode. There are consequences to this story, and it's one of the many reasons that I'd love to see a sequel to this, because Diaz is still alive at the end, at least in body, but not in mind. He has been taken over, and now Edzilar says there at the end, how do you say goodbye to somebody who's not really gone? Yeah, because the person that she knew as Diaz is still right there. I will again say that there at the end, when the option was, do I beam aboard the surrendering Elydians or not, nowhere in my mind was it that Carter Diaz was alive and would be one of the ones rescued. I was only thinking about what was the right thing for a Starfleet officer to do. What's the right thing for Jara Rydek to do? And I don't know if I'll talk about every other character because I just don't know that I have a lot to say about a lot else to say about Westbrook or Dr. Duvall or Ermot. Ermot in particular felt like a Starfleet officer .mdl from Model. Like, he was just the absolute model Starfleet officer, there to give an opposing voice, to make sure that all options were being considered, which is, by the way, one of the reasons that I offered him the first officer role. Dr. Duvall had said he will be interpreted as the safe choice, and I talked at that time about that was specifically why I was choosing him. Another reason is that no matter what idea anybody came up with, Ermot was there to say, wait, what about this? And I don't think that he was being contrarian. I think that he was urging the decision maker, have you considered this aspect to it? That is so important in the chain of command. It's so critical. And one of the options that I chose as Jar Rydek to Dr. Duvall is, I want to have opposing viewpoints. I don't want somebody who throws up random roadblocks just for the sake of it. But I never once heard Ermot say, well, what if we do this and a box of kittens gets vaporized, or just like nonsense. He was a perfect choice for first officer. So yeah, as soon as I say I don't have a lot to say about Ermot, that's what I have to say about Galvin and Sidron. Were the bad guys. Whatever sense of empathy that you might have had for them as the downtrodden working class fighting for their rights kind of gets put on the back burner once you realize that no, actually they've just found ways to be more technologically advanced and are no longer even themselves and want to overthrow the galaxy and restore the Tkon Empire. They're talking about, and what we learned from Portal 6-3 is the Tkon Empire at least had the goal of treating everybody well and making sure that everybody had access to food and medicine and everybody had a good life, provided that their good life was living within the bounds of what the Tkon Empire said was okay. They are an authoritarian regime, but they're not an evil regime. At least they don't appear to be presented that way. And who's our portal into that viewpoint? Portal 6-3, who looks at what the Scion of the Flame are doing by forcibly taking over bodies and saying, nope, that's not what we're about. Portal 6-3 has the opportunity to see the return of the Empire that he has given infinite lifetimes to long after they've completely died out, and he chooses not to do that because the way that they're going on about it is morally wrong. That tells me a lot about what the Tkon Empire might have been like, and that these Scions of the Flame would be considered the bad guys even within the Tkon Empire. So anyway, I do feel like we got a lot of vision on that. I really thought it was a very well told story, and I'm not done talking about characters because then we need to talk about Jar Rydek. I can only talk about the Jara that I played, the choices that I made along the way. I really love the fact that with both Jara and Diaz, for that matter, we got opportunities to fight for Starfleet principles, to not take the shot, to not shoot the phaser first, to fight defensively when necessary, and otherwise try to talk our way out of situations. We've all seen fiction where it's like, why are you having a conversation? Why have you not shot the bad guy? And then here I am with the opportunity to do just that, and it just feels wrong. And part of that is the fact that Jar Rydek is at least partially a member of an endangered species, and she is someone who has dedicated her life to Starfleet. What would inspire somebody to do that? She's not relaxing. In the Federation, you don't need to work. People choose to work because they want to make something of themselves. And she has chosen military service on behalf of Starfleet. What would cause somebody who's a member of an endangered species to want to do that? Because she wants to help others. She only has this one flicker of a life that is in danger of being snuffed out at any moment by simply not having access to the medicine that she needs. What could be more of a motivator than that, than to say, if I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but joining the Federation has given me access to the medicine that I need, now I want to make sure that other people have the help that they need. I just felt like she had a very clear and consistent moral compass that I wanted to live up to anytime I was making decisions as her. I don't know in my headcanon that she's quite as optimistic or as task-oriented as Carter Diaz is. I feel like Carter, for me, was very much informed by being a member of the engineering team. We don't need to worry on the lower decks about the high and mighty principles. We'll choose to do that, but what we do is we solve problems. We solve technical problems. We need to stop this ship. Well, I don't speak this language, but I recognize a warp core interface, and I'm pretty sure that I can shoot this thing with a phaser in a way that won't kill us and will slow the ship down. I like that aspect of Carter. What I liked about Jara was that she was there to fight for principles. The decision to have two separate characters that were both a high-ranking officer and enlisted men, I'm not sure what exactly the phrase would be, especially for this fictional military organization, but where Carter sort of got to keep his eyes on the road and look at the console in front of him and what do I need to do next? What's our task that we need to do? Jar was able to say, why are we doing this? And how are we going to fight this fight in a way that we can still look at ourselves in the mirror at the end? And if there's anything more Star Trek, I just don't know what it is. And they did such a great job with her character. Oh, there is one more thing. The decision to have a button prompt on the screen that exits you out to the main menu and costs you progress in the game with no confirmation window. On at least one occasion, I was looking at a tutorial screen, not the pause menu, a tutorial screen, and I pressed X by mistake. It exited out to the menu, and then because there is no option to skip dialogue or cutscenes, wound up replaying a solid 10 or 15 minutes of the game because I had just pressed one wrong button. Yeah, definitely be aware that that is a thing in this game, and hopefully that will get patched soon. There is one more sort of curious decision that we wanted to take a look at, which is that the choices in the game are not actually presented in the game. Unlike Telltale games, and frankly, every other narrative game that I can think of, you have to go to this website in order to see the percentages or how the game was rating any of your individual choices. I guess you get a little bit of that by looking at how the characters feel about you, but here on the website, by following a QR code and creating an account, you can get much more granular with it. So we took some steps to try to get as many of the decisions as possible. This may not be all-inclusive, but I do think that we can see it here on the screen right now. So let's take a quick look at some of the decisions that we made along the way. So here we are on the website, and we're going to go from the oldest to the newest, and then take a look at some of the characters, and then we'll... this might take a few, because there's a lot here. So, follow Lieutenant Bedrosian's advice and raise the shields against the energy wave. It just felt more prudent. When that energy wave was coming in from the nebula at the beginning of the game, we've got Science Officer Westbrook saying, well, we can aim a focus ray out of our deflector dish. And honest to God, I'm thinking to myself, well, they tried that once against the Borg and it did fuck all nothing. She wants to put up the shields. And when you're in Star Trek and you want to not take damage from things, you put up the shields. Also, it felt to me like the shields would do a better job of protecting the crew that were out on the hull. So it felt like that would be the better choice of the options, because it would protect the ship and the crew out on the surface of the ship, when I don't really have a good idea that aiming the deflector dish at it is going to do anything. And we have to choose one or the other because we've only got so much electricity. As we go over here, followed Captain Solano's orders and blew the bolts on the docking clamps. Interesting to me that only 18% of players did this. I said this at the start. It's my first day. I just started here. He specifically said, I need someone who's going to follow my orders because we need to reestablish trust and discipline among the crew. And based on the information that I have, Commander Ermot is saying, if we reverse the polarity on the hull, we're going to launch our engineering team out away from the hull. I'm thinking to myself, there's already shrapnel from the one docking clamp that blew. There's a massive ion storm. I don't know if the transporters are going to work. It seems much more dangerous to send these guys catapulting away from the ship as opposed to simply blowing the bolt and having them sort of deal with it. I know that that sounds flippant, but it felt like we had a better chance to get them back into the ship if they were physically on the ship. Let me put it this way. If we launched them into space and we could beam them back inside, we could also beam them back on side while they're standing on the hull, and if anything, that would be easier. So yes, I blew the bull, and I was surprised that so many of the crew were so angry about it. I did not do it because I exclusively wanted to please Solano. I did it because I earnestly felt it was the right thing to do, and apparently only 18% of people agreed with me on that. Going over, chose Edsolar to go first and escape harm during the hull walk. I was in the majority of this, but I again want to make it clear, this was not, oh, chivalry is not dead, milady. It's because she had just shoved Carlos Diaz out of the way of incoming shrapnel and gotten knocked out. I do not know at this point of the story if she is currently with a symbiote. Either way, she has already been injured. I'm gonna get her inside, like she could be suffering a brain bleed, a hemorrhage, some sort of other internal damage that is not yet showing itself. We get her inside first, and Carlos Diaz, who doesn't have any injuries that I'm aware of, maybe a quick zap from one of those plasma balls, he goes in second. So that's why I did it. It's not surprising to me that in a story about Star Trek, people would say, no, you go in first. Honest to God, the only reason I would have gone in first is because I didn't want to have a big conversation about it. Just get inside. We'll draw lots later. If it turns out that you would have won, I'll buy you a replicator ration. Like, just get inside. Scrolling over here, 90% of players were interested in a relationship with Miranda. My vote is why not? The way that I think about it is that if a character in a game is likely to express interest, and if there's like interest expressed, why not go for it? The only things that I know about Diaz and Miranda at this point in the story is that they're friends, they've gotten on well in the past. She's really putting herself out there saying like, look, I really think that there could be something more. How do you feel about it? I didn't find any reason in the story, any previous interaction between Diaz, Miranda, or Edsolar that wouldn't make it, sure, let's give it a shot. And they feel to me in this moment like mature adults, where if it turns out that the chemistry or the compatibility or the career goals or whatever else just isn't there, then they could hopefully break it off amicably. It feels like, by and large, humans in the Star Trek world are capable of having mature adult relationships in ways that don't necessarily have to get weird and ugly. So yeah, I'm not surprised 90% over here. I will also say, on more than one occasion, I felt like Miranda kind of fell into the role of like one of those character models that just wasn't quite finished. Similar to Bedrosian, felt like there was like one more pass that was needed, like the lighting, what subsurface scattering is one of those graphical techniques they use to simulate like how human skin looks in various lighting. It looked like she just wasn't quite done, but not in a way that was as off-putting as some of the other like non-speaking extras that would appear in the background. Some of them looked real rough. 81% of people chose to side with the Hotari. Yes, I decided to do that specifically because, to the best of my memory, and in fact, it was a Hotari moon. And if this is geographically or astronomically their moon, their property in orbit of their homeworld, it seems to me that ultimately they would have the say on whether or not the Illydians got to stay there. And if they wanted them out and were willing to fight and die to get them out, that would be the sensible place to go. Again, I don't care about this as being a source of dilithium for the Federation. That could have been changed, by the way, if Ambassador Spock said, oh, by the way, we're actually out of dilithium and we've got this whole humanitarian crisis happening over here with the Jem'Hadar or something. So if we don't get another shipment of dilithium, there's going to be a massive famine that happens over there and millions could die. Then I could be inspired to care about the dilithium trade. But based on the information that I had, yeah, I sided with the Hotari because they were the underdogs. It felt like they were fighting back against a superior force. And ultimately, they don't need to justify to me their decision to say, we want our homeworld and its moon back in our control. They only need to state that that's what they want, and then that should be the default position of the Federation. Scrolling over, 38% chose to save Lieutenant Bedrosian during the rescue mission on the Zelda. Specifically, this was the best moment that Bedrosian had, when she basically lit off a flamethrower in her own face to shore up this transporter patterns in the attempt to save the Illidians. I did not forget that she did this, and I have to confess, I felt bad. It was so instinctual. This woman is suffering. She's dying right in front of me. And although I saw the option on screen to complete the transport, I did, in that moment, immediately react to, this person is dying in front of me. I don't want that to happen. I literally said aloud, why would you not help her? Because I just sort of assumed that Chovak would reach over and press the transport button for me. It didn't happen. 15 Illidians died. The fact that one of them was the Admiral who had promised good things for Edgar Diaz, that doesn't factor into it. That's 15 people who don't get to go home. Bedrosian chose to thrust her hands into that control panel to try to save the Illidians. That was an affirmative choice that she made, because in that moment, she understood it to be the right thing to do. The Illidians did not choose to sacrifice themselves in the transporter, and if I had more time and a better, more complete understanding of what the consequences would be, I have to say that I probably would have chosen to complete the transport and hope that the advanced medical tech would have been able to save Bedrosian and her hands. I don't really regret the choice that I made, but I might have made a different one having more information. So that's what was happening there. We will continue on. 45% did not support Captain Solano's decision to not inform Starfleet of the Deccan threat. So again, this means that 45% said, no, I think that we should tell Starfleet about this. I am amazed that 55% of people were like, yeah, let's keep this to ourselves. That seems incredibly reckless. We don't know the full extent of this, and failing to report back means that if something goes wrong, I don't know at this point the scope of the threat. What I do know is that we can't warp out, so we're already kind of isolated. We need to get word out to somebody somewhere, so that if something weird happens and we all wind up dead, somebody will be able to follow up on it, because there's something really, really odd here. And here's Solana saying, well, but that would really be bad for my career. It'd really get in the way of my career prospects to do the right thing and save the most amount of lives. When that's your thought process, I said at one point, this is not a well man, and boy, did I mean it. Yeah, no regrets there whatsoever. And it has nothing to do with later finding out that he was a Deccan agent. I to this moment in my head, he was never not Solano. And then 73% defied Captain Solano's wishes and told Captain Riker about the stolen shield algorithms. For everything else that I just said, this is no surprise. I thought that it was a mistake to keep it a secret. And of course, when I have the opportunity, if he won't, I will. Not because I'm insubordinate, but because Solano is not making a smart decision, and everyone in the Federation is in danger now because of this whole ability to penetrate the shields at will. So I'm not surprised that 73% of people sided with this. I'd be fascinated to hear from the other percent, but yeah, the 45% is something of a surprise. So now we've got some character opinions here with some percentages. Captain Solano was enraged when Jara told Captain Riker that the shield algorithms had been stolen by the Deccan, and wished he had respected his desire to keep that information under wraps. 21% of people share that outcome. That last thing is really surprising to me, because if 73% of people told Captain Riker about it, how is it that only 21% of people got this particular outcome? And I think it must be the enraged part. Were other people capable of negotiating a better relationship with this man? Because I didn't do anything with the specific goal of pissing him off. Maybe it's because I followed his orders up until that point, and he got really angry because he started to realize somewhere subconsciously that he was way out of line, and he reacted in anger when what he should have reacted with was self-realization. Let's click on Lieutenant Bedrosian was thrilled to have Jara's support and encouragement during the Elydian rescue mission, and will be eternally grateful Jara saved her from serious injury from the plasma blast. Again, 21% of people. I really navigated a slender minority here in the relationships that I had. Ambassador Spock valued Jara's realistic assessment of the situation after the Resolute was attacked by the Veskar. 11%? I mean, I feel really good about this outcome, but I have to suspect, like, wait a second. Did the other 89% get a better outcome, or was Admiral Spock, Ambassador Spock, like, really disappointed in them? Because I will value Jara's realistic assessment. I said this at one point. Ambassador Spock complimenting Jara's keen mind sent a shiver down my spine. I was like, oh my god, I've impressed Ambassador Spock. My life is complete. Let's continue on here. Commander Westbrook respected Jara's inclination to protect the crew when the starbase ordered her to disengage the docking clamps. I feel like we've read this multiple times. Apparently I was in the 48% of people who we didn't side with him, but at least he respected the fact that we were thinking of the crew. Oops, hold on, let's not skip Tylus. Tylus was devastated to hear the disturbing news from Hotari, but took solace in Jara's words of reassurance. This was specifically when we said, hey, Tylus, I got to level with you. They're all Takan now. Everyone in that room, your queen, they're all Takan. So I guess 30% of people did that, or arrived at this particular outcome. Yeah, no real regrets there. At this point, I don't remember if I had thought that she was a Takan agent. I don't think that I did, because that really came around with the mystery of the device in engineering. That was when I was like, oh no, I think I know what's going on, and was wrong. Commander Ermot was glad. Okay, so this is all about the docking clamps again. This really, like, lingered for a while. 48% of people shared that particular outcome. Dr. Duval was grateful for Jara's defiance when Captain Solano suggested withholding information from Starfleet, and she shares Jara's concern that his judgment may be impaired. 15%. Like, is it... I guess it might be the defiance part, but also... Really? Did people not share Jara's concern? Because Solano seemed very unwell. Even at this early point, it's like, did you hear it? Did you see them? They were all out to get me. They were all against me. They were just waiting for an opportunity. Doesn't seem like a very even-keeled captain, and even if I could have mollified him, I'm not sure that I would want to, because he's on the edge and something's going to set him off. Galvin was annoyed by Jara's refusal to recognize the power of the Takan when the Veskar had the Resolute at its mercy. I actually feel like I did, but I guess what I was supposed to say was, thank you for sparing our lives. I did think carefully about doing that. Honestly, it was about the respect of the crew. I felt like that was too weak. Rolling over and just showing him my belly. Maybe this is my own sense of pride overriding Jara's pragmatism, but I felt like that would have cost me the respect of every single member of the crew. And here I am, like, brand new in charge. It felt really uncomfortable to say thank you, sir, for saving us, or sparing us. Portal 6-3 found Jara to be diplomatic and principled in their first meeting on Delphi Ardu 4, and when he pressed her on why she had come, he was struck by her reasoning and morality. I don't know if there's a version of this story where Portal 6-3 turns against the Federation crew members when he's given an opportunity, but I am delighted that I got on this guy's good side. Again, if Jara Rydek is somebody who values principles and a sense of duty, guess who else does that? He's right here. His name is Portal 6-3, whose name I never quite got right. And also, just how cool is it that they brought this guy back from, like, that one episode of Star Trek? I assume it's not the same actor, but as a character, I thought that was pretty cool. 15% of people shared this. Captain Riker was struck by Jara's confidence when discussing seeking help from Portal 6-3, and he was glad Jara was honest and transparent about the shield algorithms being stolen. I am just amazed. I'm gobsmacked. 22%. I really would have expected this to be in the high majority. It doesn't always feel fair to me to act on, like, other meta information that you have, but if you can trust anyone in Star Trek, surely Captain Riker, surely you can trust this man. Lieutenant Commander Chovak approved of Jara's decision to follow Captain Solano's orders about the bolt. Yeah, we didn't have a lot of interaction with him. 15% of people shared that. And then finally for Jara, I think finally, yeah, we can't scroll back any further. Ensign Calloway was grateful for Jara's helpful guidance when he was nervous on the shuttle flight. That went on for a long time. 2/3 of people were on that side for sure. Finally, let's take a look here at Carter. Edgelar was relieved when Carter refused to go along with Major Arminta's. That's the Admiral guy that I kept referencing. I could never remember Arminta. When Carter refused to go along with Major Arminta's plan to harm the Khan prisoner. Yeah, Starfleet doesn't torture. If I believed in torture, I might as well just inject that Takan syringe and become one of them. That's the way that I feel about it. Miranda was saddened when Carter wouldn't accept her order to join the Takan, which was made worse when he refused to respond to her. Possibly worse when I also shot her, because I think I got like a negative relationship bonus. 9%? 9%? Were the others like, well, Miranda, I wasn't planning on becoming a pod person today, but you are a very attractive redhead. Like, what's the logic here? She's not Miranda anymore. I do think that there could have been a future for Carlos and Miranda. I don't think there's a future for Carlos and whatever Takan entity she became after that. Just... this is the sort of result that makes me believe that there's something wrong with the percentages when only 9% of people got that. Again, maybe the other 90% of people were able to convince her to not be Takan anymore, and then she went on to be their best friend, and they got married at the end. I don't know. I like not knowing, by the way. Major Arminta was disappointed when Carter refused to let him torture the Takan prisoner to get the information they needed. Guess what? We didn't need that information. We got it a different way. So... me and the other 79% of people can tell you to go suck a bag. Seriously impressed was Commander Chovak by Carter's undaunted courage when he learned there would be no rescue attempt aboard the Zeldi. I didn't think of that as being courage. I thought of that as just being an engineer. When you are faced with a problem, you say, how do I solve the problem? And rarely, if ever, will it be standing around complaining about it. So I guess 26% of people got onto his good side. Seriously impressed by a Vulcan is money in my bank. Commander Westbrook enjoyed his conversation with Carter, coming away with the impression that he's smart, pragmatic, and confident in his knowledge of the ship. What a shame that he won't be able to write our letter of recommendation now that he's no longer Westbrook. But I and 31% of people got that outcome. I really played through this game in the minority, I gotta say. And then as we scroll down here to our last two people with Carter, Lieutenant Itasca was thankful for Carter's empathy and understanding when she shared her guilt over the fellow soldiers they couldn't save aboard the Zeldi. That felt like basic humanity. It felt like she's in a dark place, she's sad about her fallen comrades. Surely Carter would be able to empathize with that based on the crew that they lost aboard the Resolute. And even though he at one point has a comment about command is, we're always having to clean up the stuff that command screws up, I didn't take that as being a really serious grievance against the concept of command. I feel like Carter is just sort of like, I know what it's like to lose people. He has recently lost Miranda, and he's got to be processing that himself. Of course he's going to be able to empathize with her. I wonder what the other 84% of people had to say about it. And then finally, Ambassador Spock, who we definitely talked to a lot, impressed by Carter's use of the tractor beam to rescue a shuttle, and the distinct impression that Carter is a team player. Good, because that's exactly what I went for. I wonder what the other 24% of people had to say about it. But that's not all. There are a few more choices here from the very end that hadn't loaded properly before. 46% of people chose to save Itasca's life aboard the Zeldi. I have to say, I was really on the fence about that. I was actually internally fully prepared to let her blow out into space. This was after she had been taken over by the Takan, and I'm thinking to myself, she's a pod person. We can't trust her. We're inviting a threat, a known threat, into our escape pod that we had to cobble together out of a cargo pod and some garbage, and now we're going to let an enemy inside of it? And then I just thought about, what would a Starfleet officer do? She's pleading for help, and also I'm thinking to myself, although he's talked about being willing to sacrifice anything in order to avenge his prodigal daughter, how would it have hit Major Armenta to see her blow out into space? So there were a couple different reasons that I let her in, and I have to say that I felt good about it. It felt good to show the Takan, we're not savages, we're not barbarians, we are empathetic, thinking entities who want to do right by people. So yeah, not surprised that I was in the slight minority, pleased that I'm only in the slight minority. As you scroll over, chose to transport the Takan crystals onto the Resolute. 91% of players and I shared this. I'm amazed that it's that high, honestly. I feel like Bedrosian, she didn't make a weak case. I found it thoroughly unconvincing, but I'm a little bit surprised that other people didn't decide to bite on that. 25% of people chose Commander Ermont. It's one of those things where you're just wondering, how did the rest of them break down? Was it 70% of people who went ahead and chose Westbrook, or were they able to talk Bedrosian into the room? Did they refuse to accept her resignation? Did they decide to make her their first officer? Because I absolutely would never have done that after the ultimatum that she laid down. But if 91% of people took the course of action that would have inspired her to tender her resignation, how do you only get to 25% of people that go to Ermont? Because it would be very surprising to me if everybody else decided to go with Westbrook, but maybe they had a better sense of him and a better relationship with him there at the end. 95% of people chose to make the ultimate sacrifice and have Carter be bioformed aboard the Aphelion. I made that decision, and I said it briefly there. The way I'm thinking about it is that Miranda is going to recognize what a disruptor looks like. She's going to see that weapon, and she might just give up and snap his neck. I was always mindful of the fact that she was a trained security officer and just likely to be in better physical shape than Carter Diaz was, just by nature of her job. By reaching for the hypospray, though, that's a piece of information that Miranda doesn't have. She doesn't have memories of what this Duridium is and why he's carrying it and what it means. So she's going to be just surprised. It's this tactic that she doesn't know to expect. I simply felt that I would have a better chance to get away with it. If I felt for some reason that killing her would have avoided making the ultimate sacrifice, I might have chosen to do that, because Miranda's not home anymore, and if it's got to be me or her, I'd rather have it be me, where me is Carter here. However, I choose to go with the syringe because it seemed more likely to work, and that's something that Diaz always does. What is the best thing that's going to work? And then finally, 94% of players chose to evacuate the surviving Takan from the Aphelion. I am honestly really surprised that it's that much. I'm happy for it, but yeah, I'm in the high majority there, which is really interesting because, again, I guess it speaks to 91% of people siding against Bedrosian, but with Bedrosian right there saying like, oh, you can do it, you can just like knock them out, kill the rest of them. I'm heartened by that. I really like it. Let's take a quick look through our personality stuff as well, because this is updated. Captain Solano had high expectations for his new first officer and one simple request: unconditional loyalty. He had every confidence you would have his back no matter what and help him restore his tarnished reputation within Starfleet. Your track record in that regard was decidedly mixed, leaving Captain Solano feeling conflicted about his choice. At times you were willing to follow his explicit orders, but there were limits to how far you would go to appease him or allay his concerns. Yes, there were. 100%. Fortunately or otherwise, Captain Solano was bioformed by the Takan before he could share his opinion with Starfleet. 7% of players shared this. I will be so interested to see other people's percentages. You have no idea. Did the other 93% get something better? Worse? Did they get a letter of recommendation before he was turned, or was he not turned at all? I'm so curious about this. To say Lieutenant Bedrosian was a fan of Jara Rydek when she first arrived aboard the USS Resolute would be an understatement. She'd studied the trajectory of her career and used it as a model for her own. So when you face the difficult choice of saving countless Elydian lives or protecting her from serious harm, she never doubted you would keep her from harm's way, and she was incredibly grateful for a decision that would have otherwise altered the course of her career. Insult was added to injury when you then willfully and wantonly disregarded her feelings by transporting the Taconian crystals aboard the Resolute, which left her disillusioned and questioning her admiration from Jara from the start. She's just gonna have to get over that. I am so non-apologetic about that. Her feelings are about literal attempted genocide. She wants to wipe out thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Taconians who at this moment have done nothing wrong. I'm sorry that hurts your... sorry, I shouldn't say that I'm sorry. I'm not remotely sorry that that hurts your feelings. 17% of people share this particular outcome. High five to the other 17%. I couldn't be more sure about the decision that I made there. Maybe I will see other people's percentages and they were able to talk her out of her ways and preserve her career. But as far as I'm concerned, she can go spend the rest of her life being tactical officer on a garbage scow. She should not be in Starfleet. Ambassador Spock was reassured during the realistic assessment of the senior staff briefing on the Resolute. 19% of people reassured him. Well, I also noticed that we're green with him. He seemed to have a high opinion of her. A high opinion from Spock is a high opinion indeed. Commander Westbrook wasn't exactly subtle expressing his concerns about the arrival of a new first officer, a role he had long envisioned for himself. You successfully navigated his initial abrasiveness, but it didn't help matters when you chose to ignore his advice about the deflector pulse during the crisis at the space dock, which then set the tone for your relationship. Maybe that's it then. Maybe that's why we didn't choose him, because we disregarded his advice one time. He decided to never be helpful again and never express himself in a constructive way. More importantly, Commander Westbrook was disappointed you chose not to confide your suspicions about Captain Solano being bioform, and was crestfallen when he failed to receive the promotion to first officer he'd sought his entire career. 6% of people had that outcome. Again, very curious about this. I've spoken about him for as much as I care to say. I don't have anything new there, so we'll go forward. I will say crestfallen is not quite the emotion that I associate with having an outright temper tantrum about it. Tylos was grateful for Jar's words of encouragement regarding peace with the Ilidians when they discussed the matter in sickbay. Cool. I don't know what the other 91% of people got, but grateful and green and feeling optimistic about peace with the Ilidians? Yes, I like that. I'm red with him, by the way. After the accident that claimed the life of the previous XO, First Officer Irma knew the crew of the USS Resolute desperately needed a strong second in command to both complement and, when necessary, challenge Captain Solano. True, yes. Initially, he wasn't quite sure of what to make of your leadership skills when you vacillated between challenging authority and simply following orders when the lives of the crew were at risk. His feelings were hurt when you chose not to confide your suspicions about Captain Solano being bioformed, but the sting of that slight was short-lived once you announced he would become your new first officer, which remains the crowning achievement of his career. 4% of people got this specific outcome. In my heart of hearts, the highest percentage for any of these first officer choices is like 12%, because everybody got slightly different variations of this, and there's no high majority. That would be really awesome. After the Resolute was hit by the bioforming ray, Dr. Duvall fully supported Jara's cautious reaction when she gave the order to lock down the lower decks. It was that, or what was the other one? Phaser set to stun? Again, I just assumed that phaser set to stun was the default. It would be similar to saying, make sure there's a strong oxygen-nitrogen mix in the air. Like, yeah, we kind of do that already. We don't need to be told about that. So yeah, lock down the lower decks. That was a harder decision because there were non-transformed crew still down there fighting the good fight. And yeah, we locked them in because it was them or everyone. It doesn't feel good, but what was the lesson that Troy learned when she was going through that command training program? Sometimes you have to order Geordi LaForge to die in order to save everybody else in the crew. Didn't feel good, but we made the best decision that we could. Even when facing certain defeat, Galvin remained determined and defiant to the end in the face of Jara's derision. 4%, is it the derision part? Or did other people get him to say, I'm so sorry, just as he blew up? Was anybody successful at, like, converting this guy and convincing him to, like, be a good guy at the end? I've decided to reform. 4%, you guys. That's almost as low as a percentage as I got at the end of Detroit Become Human. Like, I'm really in a very small minority here. Portal 6-3 appreciated Jara's sensitivity when he was overwhelmed by feelings of loss inside the Takan vault. He was eternally grateful when Jara transported the Taconian crystals from the vault to the Resolute. 7% of people got on this degree of good side for him. I feel really good about that. We talked about that already. Yeah, I love it. After Captain Riker arrived at the head of the Starfleet Armada for the climactic battle, he was pleased when Jara sounded so grateful. Of course I'm grateful. The Titan could punch through a moon by just warping at it, much less what it could do with its phaser arrays. Yes. Hey, Riker, I'm glad to see you. You can give me trombone lessons after this. Of course I'm glad to see this dude. After Lieutenant Commander Chovak warned Jara of the dangers of a warp core breach at the height of the battle against the Aphelion, he was impressed by her unshakable confidence. It was the only other choice. It was less confidence. That was a projection of confidence. It was that, or there was one of the other choices that was like, this either works or we all die. Yeah, if it doesn't work, we all die, and if we don't do it, we all die. So we either flip the coin and hope it lands on its edge, or we don't flip it at all and we just open our wrists. Like, we've got to do this. It's the only option. From there, what do we say to Chovak about this? You've got this, bro. I know you can do this. I don't have a doubt in the world. Of course I have doubts, but I'm not going to say that to him. Not like, well, do your best. I assume you can figure it out. No pressure, by the way, or else we all die. 9% of people shared this particular outcome. 100%. I'm very glad with where we wound up with that. Ensign Calloway was somewhat suspicious and more than a little concerned when he discovered Jara Lurkian engineering. I don't know why he was suspicious. We had 2 interactions with him as Jara Rydek. One of them was, hey man, you're going to be okay on this shuttle ride. And the other one was, I found this... No, she didn't say that I found this device. She said, did you see anybody else lurking around here? I didn't say it's a need to know, even though it is. But when there's a situation that there is pod people among us, imposters among us, I didn't want to be excessively secretive in a way that would invite additional suspicion. He doesn't know there's pod people, but I'm figuring there's only a matter of time until it gets out. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this guy's going to know that Jara was lurking around in here, so she might as well say, hey, we had some communication problems. Do you know anything about it? Do you see anybody around here? Because, by the way, there's pod people. Also, the fact that there were communication problems, literally true. She told him the truth. She just omitted some of the finer details in that moment. Sidran refused to accept Jara's explanation for the Takan dead and blamed her for blatantly manipulating Portal 6-3. Yeah, I could give a fuck what this guy thinks of me. Yeah, he probably doesn't think that I'm a very snappy dresser either, or that the color of my eyes are ugly. Too bad. Not interested in his opinion. 15% of people share this. Yeah, there we go. Now, let's take a quick look at Carter's relationships. You proved that when you insisted she go first during the dangerous Hull walk mission, keeping her from harm's way and reminding Nili yet again why she values your friendship so much. You proved that when you insisted she go first on the walk mission, keeping her from harm's way and reminding Nili. This is a very oddly structured sentence, but the point is, she really liked that. Yes, I value your friendship as well. Nili joined Starfleet because she wanted to be part of an egalitarian organization with a mission to promote the greater good. Boy, that's much more concise than what I said earlier. So, she was particularly proud when you lived up to those ideals, when you refused to torture the Takan prisoner aboard the Aphelion and save Itasca's life. In addition to all of what I said before, I held out hope through the very end that there would be some way to reverse the bioforming. And I didn't want to look at that dude in the eye and say, yeah, sorry that I removed 4 of your fingers or whatever. There were a lot of reasons not to do that torture. 13% of people had this outcome with Nili. You seemed receptive to the idea, and Miranda was encouraged there might be romance aboard the USS Resolute. Of course, it didn't help matters when she was then bioformed and turned into a Scion of the Flame, but she really didn't like it when you sent her to the brig instead of sickbay. I don't care what she does or doesn't like once she's a Scion of the Flame. Oh boy, we really insulted her by being correct that she couldn't be trusted. The final nail in the coffin for your relationship was your refusal to join her as a Scion of the Flame, and her only regret is that Edselar managed to kill her. She really regretted being killed. Edselar managed to kill her despite her every effort to kill you first. For what it's worth, Miranda, I also regret not shooting you more, but I did it at every poor time that I could, every opportunity that I could. Now, I will note, by the way, that we are orange with Edselar and orange with her, so I didn't have as good a relationship with Edselar as I might have. I don't know where I let her down, but I still feel good about this description, that she valued the friendship very much and admires Carter Diaz's ideals. And she seemed sad about the fact that they couldn't be friends anymore because he's not Carter. I don't know, I'll take it. Wow, hold on, you guys, 2%. Look at this. Despite being thrust together under desperate circumstances, you found a way to get Major Armenta to rally behind your leadership and unite against your common enemy. You differed in the lengths you were willing to go to gain any possible advantage, and ultimately he was grateful when you chose to save Itasca's life. I feel like these choices are really granular. Like this 2% reflects getting on his good side, demonstrating leadership, differing from him about the torture, and saving Itasca's life. That if we had done any one of those other things, we would have been in a different percentage. I will wear my 2% with honor. Recognizing that, you did an admirable job in staying in Lieutenant Chovak's good graces. Okay, so it really feels like we're missing a preceding sentence here. He admired your work ethic and commitment to whatever might have been the task at hand. Yo, we got a straight up Vulcan salute. We got a full on live long and prosper from this dude. I will take it. I was really glad for that. We were only orangish with him, but I'll take that. Also, just really quick, I did not live long and prosper to Spock, because although there's like the fanboy in me that would have wanted to do that, it feels really presumptuous to say that to a Vulcan. I'm not sure that he would have been offended, but it just feels inappropriate that I'm taking an element of his culture and like, hey, don't you want to do this to me first? If he had done it to me, yeah, straight up live long and prosper. But instead I just said thank you because it felt like the courteous thing to do. Commander Westbrook was proud of Carter's ability to be a team player and his willingness to offer realistic solutions to a complex problem during the senior staff briefing aboard the Resolute. 2% of people, wow! Because given how else everything else went with this dude, that seems like very high praise. And I tried to be constructive. At every point with Diaz, what do I do to be constructive and helpful? Whether it was doing or advising. Regardless of his reasoning, Lieutenant Itasca was grateful Carter saved her life. 7% of people got that. Okay. We were green with her. One of my best, closest relationships with Carter Diaz was making minimal friends with Lieutenant Itasca, the pod person from Beyond the Stars. Ambassador Spock was impressed by the tractor beam. Yeah, okay, so we've read this before. And then Portal 6-3. When confronted with the task of destroying the Aphelion, Portal was glad to hear Carter shared his appreciation for the ship. I wasn't necessarily meaning to compliment the ship at any point, but yeah, I guess just saying that it was a beautiful ship. In my head, I'm just like, I don't want to antagonize this dude, and it feels like this ship was probably a pretty important part of his culture, at least with regards to Takan architecture, so I might as well say, yeah, you have a lovely home here. We'll be blowing it up now, but yes, it does seem pretty nice to me. So that wraps up our time with Star Trek Resurgence. I'm concerned about showering this with excessive praise because it does have some technical issues. It could certainly serve to be brushed up some, more graphical options, better performance, the ability to go to 60 frames per second, a fix up of some of the odd bugs like the phaser bug and some other animation popping. But just hot damn if this didn't capture everything that I would have wanted from a Star Trek narrative game. This was significantly better than I had expected going in. So for all of its flaws, I highly recommend this game. This end talk here has been loaded with spoilers, and all I can say is that there appear to be a variety of other paths to this game. I think that I would strongly recommend this to anybody who enjoys Star Trek or narrative games whatsoever, and I hope that this team gets to do more. more Star Trek games and more non-Star Trek games. This team is tremendously talented, and it is easy for me to feel like this was a real labor of love, particularly for the character designers, the writers, the scenario designers. I think that this was just, and forgive the pun here, but really just a stellar experience. I had such a great time with it. I did forget to mention earlier during the sort of like broader review, the gameplay didn't always feel really good, and the shooting in particular felt very bad. A lot of the trouble solving, the problem solving, the little mini games to align the transporter or power up the beam, isolate the patterns, work the tractor beam, even flying the shuttle, those I had a good time with. The shooting, the phaser shooting, I didn't want to harp on this too much during the playthrough, but man, it feels bad. I played the entire game with a controller. The sensitivity on the stick is just wildly inaccurate during those phaser shooting segments. The beam never lasts as long as you want it to, and it was never clear to me if you would get any benefit from firing a longer blast versus multiple lighter blasts. And then that tram chase at the end, when you've got this other sort of like train car that's next to you and you're supposed to shoot the pilot, I don't know what I did that made it past that. I swear to you guys on my honor that I consistently pressed the button to just do a regular retry as opposed to retry in story mode. And I underscore that here because I don't feel there was anything I did differently in the time that I succeeded versus the multiple times before that I failed. I didn't earn my way past that. The game just said, close enough, and it just crashed the tram and allowed us to go forward. I don't want to play that section anymore, and I would say that although I rarely ever replay narrative games for any reason, I would especially not be looking forward to replaying the shooting section specifically. If this development team gets a chance to do another game, and I desperately hope that they do, they need a new combat or scenario designer specifically for that, because they just need more time, more hands, more attention, more expertise to bring to that. I don't mean to knock the people that probably worked very hard to put that together, but they were by far the lowest point in the game, and that includes some of the kind of occasionally irritating bugs or that one exit out to the main menu that cost some progress. The shooting sections, if there were fewer of them or they were just cut scenes, I honestly think that it would have been a better overall experience. I'd forgotten to mention that earlier. So that's it. That's everything that I have to say about Star Trek Resurgence. This was a fantastic playthrough. I greatly enjoyed it. For all of the warts and the nitpicks and the technical shortcomings that I identified, I just ultimately had a fantastic time with it. This is, by the way, the sort of game that if I gave scores would probably slot in at like a 7 out of 10, because as much as I enjoyed it, it is hard to overlook some of the very real technical oddities about the way that it's put together. With some patches, I feel like it would rise significantly, and I would never want to besmirch all of the effort that went into it, because just up and down the line, this was a wonderful treat and I enjoyed it tremendously. That's everything that I have to say about this. Thank you guys so much for joining us through this playthrough of Star Trek Resurgence and hopefully enjoying the videos as we put them up. As always, we look forward to sharing these experiences with you guys live on the channel, and the fact that we weren't doing that for these narrative playthroughs, it's because there is, again, such an emphasis on the storytelling and the mini games and other things. There's no way to interact in real time, but hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about this game now that it's complete and we've been able to enjoy the adventure sort of asynchronously. And thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. It is the decision by some viewers to subscribe, to gift subscriptions, to cheer. We value our lurkers. We value every single follower. These are being put up because people have made the decision to invest in the next 30 days by subscribing, and we want to make sure that there's always great content to put up no matter what might happen. Technical failings, personal illness, injury, whatever might befall in the future, this is why we do this, and it is a thank you to all of you. So with that, we will go out here. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the future for some more wonderful streams.